From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery.
Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to JAMA Otolaryngology Author Interviews. Thanks for joining us today. This is Paul Bryson. I'm the director of the Cleveland Clinic Voice Center and section head for laryngology, and your media editor and host of our podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Ruth Davis. She is the assistant professor of otolaryngology head and neck surgery at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And also, I wanted to highlight when we first became acquaintances at the Lerner College of Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic. So it's particularly enjoyable for me today to see this arc in your career and your development over the years now. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Davis.
Thanks, Dr. Bryson. It's wonderful to be here and wonderful to be talking to you, one of the mentors who helped me choose to go into otolaryngology and laryngology specifically. So really wonderful to be here.
Well, we have a great topic today. We're going to talk about a recent consensus statement on trial design for airway stenosis. And this is going to be part of the third proceedings of the North American Airway Collaborative. As we get started, I was hoping, Dr. Davis, could you give us just a little bit of your background and your sort of journey to be an airway surgeon and laryngologist? And then just for the listener, tell us a little bit about the North American Airway Collaborative. It's been a great undertaking and a great group of people from around the world, really.
Yeah, happy to. So I originally started at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio for medical school. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to work with a number of wonderful otolaryngologists and got really interested in otolaryngology and specifically laryngology for its impact on voice and swallowing. But of all of the things, airway was something that I found really interesting to take care of patients with airway stenosis because it's so impactful to quality of life. If you can't breathe, you really can't do a whole lot. So yourself and other mentors really sparked my interest in laryngology, went on to Johns Hopkins for my residency in otolaryngology, and then did my fellowship at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, and then came back home here to Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And now I'm, as you said, an assistant professor here and really excited to continue my journey studying airway stenosis.
Well, it's been fun to watch you start your career at the University of Wisconsin. And I understand you also are a funded researcher with your focuses on airway stenosis and laryngeal injury.
Yes, thank you so much. I recently received a Triologic Society Career Development Award to study acute laryngeal injury after intubation. We're looking at mechanotransduction and microbiome in patient samples in an animal model. So really excited about that.
Yeah, congratulations on that work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really important that we better understand the processes so we can hopefully prevent them or at least modify them. Well, today I wanted to get into this work and this consensus statement. Can you give us a little bit of the background? Just tell the listener who may not know, what's the North American Airway Collaborative?
Sure. It's an international voluntary consortium. It was founded in 2014 with the goal of really advancing the science and the treatment of patients with airway stenosis. It includes over 30 institutions across the United States, Europe, Australia, and it's really a multidisciplinary group of airway stenosis clinicians, as well as researchers and patient partners that have been really critical.
Yeah, it's really been pretty transformative, I would say, for patients and people with this airway condition. One of your mentors at Vanderbilt, Dr. Gelbard, he's a friend of the podcast. He's been on the podcast. Can you elaborate a little bit? This is the third proceedings of our Airway Collaborative. Just tell the listener a little bit about what the goal of this meeting was, and then we can dive into the elements of the statement.
Yes, the focus of this symposium, as you alluded to, the different symposiums have had different emphases. This one focused on clinical trial design in airway stenosis because, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of translational research that's moving our field forward, but the next step is to really figure out how to translate those results from preclinical studies and basic science studies to patients. So focusing now on how we can design clinical trials as a group to bring the results of preclinical studies to patients as effectively as possible.
Clinical trials in airway stenosis have been sort of an endangered species, right? I mean, to date, there's very few. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes. There was a recent publication from Dr. Hillel's group at Hopkins, a phase 1 trial of everolimus in idiopathic subglottic stenosis. But that was the first prospective trial, therapeutic trial to be done that I'm aware of. And there really aren't many. And part of the reason for that is because of this disease being so rare. And it's really challenging to accrue enough patients to effectively and power a study to accurately assess the efficacy of an intervention. And that's the whole goal of the North American Airway Collaborative, is to build a multi-institutional collaborative to pool patients and resources and knowledge to hopefully develop some of these larger studies.
Yeah, cost is a big deal too, right? There's some very, sort of provocative medications that might impact some of the biomarkers and targets that we've found in basic science work, like what you're trying to do. But there can be some cost limitations, right? It's not easy to just prescribe some of the drugs that might hold the most promise.
Absolutely. Cost limitations, insurance coverage, questions of risk benefit, efficacy, and side effects. Is it worth it to try something new that we know some of these immunomodulatory medications do carry some side effects? Which ones? How? What dose? There's a lot we don't know.
So what were some of the take-home points for designing a trial for airway stenosis?
So through the conversations, the different presentations at this symposium, we really came to realize the need for common endpoints in order for us to compare results of different, maybe single institution studies that are done across the country or the world, to be able to compare results of these studies in the absence of being able to test everything in a large multi-center trial, given the cost and practical limitations that you mentioned. So developing a consensus around which endpoints we think will be the most helpful and effective in small single-center trials so that we can compare results across institutions. That was one of the things that came out of our conversation. So we developed a consensus statement to try to answer that question.
My recollection, we have a few tools that are pretty easily used by a lot of us. Some that come to mind are certainly patient-derived surveys, right? So I understand there's a dyspnea index and some other things that patients are able to complete before treatment and after treatment. And then I think probably one of the more important objective measures that perhaps a lot of us use is peak flow measurement. Can you talk a little bit about the utility of peak flow and peak flow measurement in our patients with airway stenosis?
Definitely. Based on our consensus, our conversations as a group, we felt like peak flow, peak expiratory flow rate, or PEFR, would be the best primary endpoint for these studies because it is physiologic. It's really evaluating airflow through the airway. And this is a measure that's been used for monitoring asthma at home for many years. And so that's something that can be done with a simple, inexpensive device by the patient at home on a daily or weekly or whatever kind of basis that they'd like to keep an eye on things, or just when they feel that things are changing and they want to put a number to it. So this is a measure that has been shown to correlate with quality of life as well as anatomic measures of airway narrowing, like on CT. And so it seems to really be a nice summative measure for us to look at for when patients need another intervention or when their stenosis is recurring.
Yeah, it seems to be a really nice tool. Aside from our own patients here in Cleveland and perhaps yours in Wisconsin, a lot of times people can message in and let you know how they're feeling, but then also the peak flow is like a nice number that they can track and provide as well. So it's another measure that we can have a little bit of an objective one rather than just a feeling, or even though the feeling is often very real.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
The number is nice to track.
Definitely.
Can further help justify maybe a recommendation for an intervention.
especially patients who come from far away and can't come in for an exam. They can call in and you can ask, hey, what's your peak flow been? And that can help guide, do we need to see you in the office and kind of go from there? Or, oh, that's really low, it's 100, let's just book the OR, or hey, come into the ED, so it can be really a helpful indicator. And there's been studies from the NoAAC group that have shown cutoffs or helpful indicators of when patients might be heading towards needing another surgery.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about access and empowering the patient. Sometimes people travel very far, or it's multiple hours, or it's arranging childcare, family care, or work absences. So I think in this population, it's like a really nice thing to be able to provide us as surgeons to, maybe try to be as efficient as we can be for them and respectful of their time and their airway condition.
Definitely.
Any other take-home points on the consensus statement? Anything that surprised you or that you think is important to share with the listener as we move forward from this proceedings meeting?
Yes. So I think really thinking about powering a study appropriately, and that's partly why having some of these consistent endpoints across institutions can be helpful. But thinking about if we do use peak expiratory flow rate as our primary outcome, actually running through that power calculation that we need about 100 patients to run a randomized trial to compare any novel therapy to a placebo, and that no one institution is likely to accrue that number in any meaningful amount of time. And so really emphasize to us the importance of this collaboration. And as we look towards trying to get drugs into this pipeline to translation, thinking about working with the FDA and what that process might look like, that's something that a lot of us as physicians might not really be aware of. It's not something we learn about in medical school. And so Dr. Clint Allen joined us and shared some of his experience from running clinical trials for RRP, recurrent respiratory papillomatosis, and about who's going to sponsor the trial, and then working with statisticians to power the trial appropriately. There's a lot of helpful points to consider.
Yeah, and aside from navigating at the FDA level, it's sometimes hard to forge partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, right? This is somewhat of an orphan condition and a rare condition, and so it's difficult sometimes to garner interest at the pharma level to expand indications and things like that. So it's important to not just build the relationships, but perhaps look at other organ systems that have fibrosing and inflammatory conditions where there's some at least methodological overlap with what you're trying to achieve with mitigating stenosis and relapses.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time today and having you come on to the podcast. I wanted to highlight your work and the work of NoAAC, and it's a nice, almost like a 3-part series where we talked with Dr. Gelbard, maybe a little more than a year ago, and then we had a conversation with Dr. Hillel on the everolimus trial, and then, to try to bookend it here with the consensus statement from the meeting. So hopefully the next time we sit down on the podcast to talk about airway stenosis, we'll be talking about another, maybe a randomized clinical trial or some translational work from you or our colleagues.
That would be wonderful. I really hope so. Keep moving the field forward.
This is Paul Bryson, and I've been speaking with Dr. Ruth Davis about airway stenosis and the recent consensus statement from the North American Airway Collaborative regarding drug trial design. You can find a link to the article in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.